So, quick show of hands, who has heard of Palantir's NHS contract in the room? Nice, okay. Okay, and the media push is going well. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Palantir in the NHS campaign, mostly as like a demonstration that these companies are not infallible, actually, and they are massively expanding, as the other speakers have said, this technology they have developed in Palestine and have tested in military applications in Palestine. They're expanding it hugely into military contracts in the UK and the NHS contract. Their expansion also means that they have more points of vulnerability, right? So the expansion is obviously a sign of their growing power, but it also means that there are more places where people can attack and weaken these companies. So I'll talk about the kind of Palantir NHS contract as an example of that. And to start that, we're going to learn about data systems, because it is just software actually that these companies sell, and they get a lot of kind of selling snake oil, of selling themselves as kind of the new kind of arbiters of the world, and they're going to design these miraculous, brilliant technologies, and actually their software is quite understandable, and if we break down both what they're actually selling, who they're selling it to, what are the weaknesses of that software, where can we put pressure, it's actually just the same as any kind of other organizing strategy. But big tech companies benefit a lot from this kind of mythical allure that they have as untouchable and kind of godlike. So I'm expecting slightly less hands. Who has heard of the concept of federating data? Okay, nice. Okay, so Palantir's software that it sells to the NHS is based on the concept of federating data. So what that means is, say, you have a load of data, you have a load of data, it doesn't talk to each other, you put it all into a software that can connect the data, and then it kind of sucks up and analyzes that data. That is what Palantir does for the military. It's what, well, actually not federation, but in general, this concept of sucking up data for the purposes of analysis is what Palantir specializes in. So they might take surveillance data from the Israeli military, they might take social media data, they might take government contract data, and they suck it into their software for the purposes of analysis and then decision making in warfare, surveillance, policing. So it's kind of applying that same contract to NHS health data. So that means that every hospital in the country, and this is part of demystifying these companies, what we did as a big part of this campaign is find a significant weak point in this contract, that every hospital in the country has to move to this software in order for that data to be sucked up. So it's not because of the way the NHS data exists at the moment, it's all quite separate, but in order for Palantir to actually suck up the data, every hospital has to adopt the software. So that means that every hospital that's allegedly accountable to its local community has to make a choice to transition from software they're already using to Palantir software. And that means that there's a key weak point in the contract where we can say, more than we're unhappy about this contract, we don't like this contract, we can say we're going to sabotage the rollout of this software, right, by targeting each individual hospital in the country. So another thing that this means that we'll come on to later is that this creates a huge national data set. So the NHS, the UK's national health system, is estimated to be the world's biggest complete health data set, worth about £10 billion, roughly. So the nationalisation of huge amounts of health data has huge consequences, which we'll come on to later. And maybe also coming on to later, the Palantir's NHS contract is a symptom of much wider moves to do with government surveillance, the expansion of big tech, the outsourcing and privatisation of the NHS. But it's a very strategic target for all of those different movements. So the kind of strategic concept behind the campaign is if we can prove that you can cancel a massive health contract on the basis of the supplier being involved in genocide, that expands the capacity for wider BDS campaigns. So that's kind of what the contract actually is. And then if we think about kind of organising strategies, so the reason why this contract is so controversial and why so many people are targeting it is for three main reasons. The first is obviously solidarity with Palestinians. So obviously, as other speakers have alluded to, Palantir is deeply involved not only in the genocide in Gaza, but in the day-to-day surveillance of Palestinians. And this campaign really came out of a call from Palestinian health unions. So Palestinian health unions, I think in November 2023, put out a call for solidarity for health workers around the world to disrupt the complicity of their own institutions in the destruction of the healthcare system in Gaza and in the genocide in Gaza overall. Using this software makes health workers in the UK complicit in that genocide. And one of the things kind of that other speakers have spoken about is dual use technology. So the thing about Palantir software is it's all the same software. So whether you procure it to run your chicken factory or to run your policing department, it's the same baseline software. So that means that any improvements that they get from the NHS contract benefit the company overall and benefit the software overall. And in Palantir's case, one of the big benefits they're getting from this contract is reputational benefit. So this is one of their biggest quote-unquote civilian contracts, where they get to say, oh, we don't just do bombing and surveillance, we actually also do waiting lists, actually. So they get to present themselves as more than a military company through this contract. So that's number one. Number two is that this contract massively expands the capacity for state surveillance in the UK. So Palantir's NHS contract is one of multiple contracts, including with the military and the police. And what Palantir have done in the US is gain sequential government contracts. And then when Trump said, we're going to rip up any data sharing restrictions and combine all the data the government holds for the purposes of mass deportation and protest repression, Palantir said, oh, no problem. We're actually holding this all on our software anyway, and we can help you to link up that data. So, for example, Palantir had already a contract with the Department of Health, and in that data set included people's addresses, right? Then the escalation of mass deportation starts in the US, and ICE has a contract with Palantir. The data sharing restrictions between ICE and the health department are lifted, and Palantir said, okay, well, we'll actually, give you the addresses from the Department of Health data and use that to create an ICE map of where potential targets might be for deportation. So the more that these companies expand into the state, the more that they can combine government data sets for the purposes of surveillance. And this is not a hypothetical threat, so Reform in the UK have a policy document that says we will combine NHS, government, Home Office, DHS, whoever the tax people are, data for the purposes of emulating an ICE-style immigration system in the UK. Palantir's UK CEO, Louis Mosley, said, if they're elected, we will do that. So the expansion of the capacity for state surveillance is a really key part of what Palantir offers as a service, again, based on what they have offered to the Israeli state. And the third thing is that this contract is one of many examples of outsourcing public functions to the private sector. So, as people will be aware, the concept of privatising the NHS is horrific in the UK, and no government would get away with doing it publicly, so what they do is they sell off millions of pounds worth of private contracts to their friends instead. So what this contract also does is embeds kind of an austerity logic that the private sector, especially these huge evil tech companies, can do things better than the public sector and in-house development. So just to end in terms of like what people can actually do and the organising strategy, as I said, we're aiming to actually stop the rollout of this software. So not just say we don't like it, oh please stop doing this software, but actually to use our power as workers, if you work in the NHS, and also as patients who your local hospitals are meant to be accountable to. And for example, in Liverpool, any guesses as to which hospital is using Palantir software the most in Liverpool?
I know, Bobby.
It's actually Old Hay, the children's hospital. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah.
One of the newest. Probably because it's one of the newest.
Yeah, maybe. So Old Hay are using Palantir software quite significantly. And so we have these local institutions that are meant to be accountable to, say, children in Liverpool who are using software that's been used to kill children in Palestine. So these are very direct links between our health data, the hospitals that are meant to be accountable to us, and the murder of Palestinians. And yeah, maybe to come back to later in the Q&A, but these companies are not infallible. These are tried and tested organising tactics, whether that's workplace organising tactics, community organising tactics, that can be used to get contracts cancelled, that can be used to put huge political pressure on people that back companies like Palantir, and that are rooted in solidarity with the people who these companies most impact, and also rooted in preventing their expansion into the state in the UK. And it can feel like these things are really intangible. Actually, by organising in your local area, targeting your local hospital, wider impact. And we're now at the point in this campaign where the government are considering cancelling the contract because of the uproar that's happened. And we need to get it over the line. So, yeah.